Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Ezekiel Class, and welcome at home. Those of you that are joining us, we are very, very happy to have you here this morning. I'm back this week. Thank you. Thank you for teaching last week. I appreciate that. And next week I'm going to be gone again. Sorry about that. I'm gone 2 out of 3 weeks. I'm going to be out in Wyoming next week skiing. And they're getting tons of snow. They had 30 inches of snow yesterday where I'm going. So the skiing is going to be great, I think. And Pastor Stephen is going to be teaching next week, and he'll be back to teaching on the names of God. And I will be back the following week, and I promise I'll be with you for quite a while. You'll get tired of me after a while. But I promise I will be back and be with you for a long time after that. So, David, again, thank you for teaching last week. Appreciate the lesson and whatnot. Go back, and am I speaking loud enough? Yes. Okay. Earlier I was not speaking loud enough, so I am back far enough now? Okay. So again, hi everybody at home. We're glad to have you. So this morning we are in Ezekiel chapter 26 and also chapter 27. We're going to do all of chapter 26 this week, and we're going to do about half, or a little more than half of chapter 27. And we're going to be studying about the city of Tyre. And Tyre is a city that was a major center in the world during Ezekiel's time. So this is the 5th vision that Ezekiel has. Remember, the book of Ezekiel is made up of 13 different visions that God gives Ezekiel. And Ezekiel's located in Babylon when he gets these visions. The visions are about what's going on in Jerusalem and what's going on around the world at that time. But Ezekiel's actually located in Babylon when he's getting these visions. And he's in front of the leaders of Babylon. Every couple of days or so, he would get together with the leaders of Babylon and give them the latest words from God, the latest prophecies from God. So picture yourself in a classroom in front of Ezekiel in Babylon in 586 BC. Now, there are a couple of different translations of this that have different dates. It looks like the most likely date for this is probably February 6th of 586 BC as the date that this is happening, although there is some controversy about that among Bible experts. I'm not going to dive into that with you, but there's some controversy. But it looks like this vision is occurring on this particular date. Remember, as we go in here, we actually started this process last week. God, in the first 24 chapters of Ezekiel, God talks about the awful things that Judah did, that Jerusalem did, and about how they were going to be punished for that, and how God had withdrawn the glory of God even from the temple during that period. So that's what was studied in the first half of Ezekiel. As we've come to the second half of Ezekiel, we're into a whole different thing now. The first thing that God does in the second half of Ezekiel is to say, now that I'm in the process of destroying Judah, let me tell you, you Gentile nations out there, that you're not going to be spared either if you don't make the commitment to me. So he's talking to Gentile nations now, and he talks to 7 Gentile nations in particular that were active at that time. Notice the number 7, right? God picks 7 Gentile nations. 7, as we know from the Bible, is the number for completeness in the Bible. So when you see 7 of something, God is telling you that is a complete thing. So what God is in essence saying here is he's going to give us the names of 7 different kingdoms that existed, that were Gentile kingdoms at that time. But he's talking about Gentiles of all times, and that includes us, right? We are Gentiles. We are not Jews. The world is either Jews or Gentiles. We are not Jews. We are Gentiles. So this is about us as well. So the kind of things that God's talking about here for the Gentile nations will also apply to us. And as we're going through that, remember that as we're talking about it. So this week we're going to talk about the Phoenician city of Tyre. If this is the Mediterranean Sea out here, this is Jerusalem. This is Babylon up here, which is where Ezekiel is. Ezekiel's in Babylon. Tyre is the richest city in the world at that point. One of the richest cities there's ever been. The richest city in the world. It's a giant seaport town in what is currently known as Lebanon. There's actually still a city in Lebanon named Tyre, by the way. It still exists today. So if you go to Lebanon, I wouldn't advise it, but if you go to Lebanon, you could still go to the city of Tyre today. It's still there. Tyre was a giant seaport trading town there, and there was a king of Tyre, and the king of Tyre had his palace on a little island that was just off the shore, and that little island had the king's palace on it. It also had the temple to their god on it. So it was the center of their world, if you will, was this little island that was off the coast. And the island was considered to be impregnable. The king built a 150-foot wall around this entire island. The island was about 1 square mile. He built a 150-foot high wall around this island so that nobody could get there. I mean, even if you came by boat, how were you going to get in, right? How do you put a battering ram up to knock the gates down or whatever? It was considered to be impregnable. We'll talk about that. God says it's not impregnable, but it was considered to be impregnable at the time. It is the trading center of the world. It's a great seafaring nation, and basically they sent their ships out all over the Mediterranean. We're going to see the first place he's going to talk about is in Spain, which is way over there someplace. It's on the other edge of the Mediterranean. So these were seafaring people, and they were traders. They knew how to trade goods with various people. They were the first great trading nation of the world. And trading nations get rich. We know that, right? That's what made the British rich for so many centuries, was that they were a seafaring nation that went out and traded with the world. It's what has made America rich, is that we've traded with the world. It's making China rich today, is trading with the world. Trading with the world makes people rich. And this was the richest place in the world at that time, and it was the most beautiful city in the world. It was considered to be the most beautiful city in the world. So it is the city of Tyre, and it's the 5th city now that we're going to look at, and we're going to look at it today. So let me start with for those of you who are at home, please open your Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 26, and those of you here in class have it in your handouts. By the way, if you're watching at home, you can download the handout from your screen there. So I'm going to do the first 2 verses here first. This is chapter 26, verse 1 and 2. In the 11th month of the 12th year, on the first day of the month, that would be February 6, 586 BC, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, because Tyre has said to Jerusalem, aha, the gate to the nations is broken, the gate to the nations is broken, and its doors have swung open to me. Now that she lies in ruins, I will prosper. So let me stop there, and we'll talk about what God's talking about here. Tyre was a great trading nation, the greatest in the world. They were on the ocean. They traded all over the oceans of the world. Jerusalem was on a major trade route here, and a lot of local trade coming up from Arabia and Babylon and Egypt down here and Syria up there. A lot of it came through Israel, through Judah. So Judah had a lot of trading going on there as well. And basically, at this point, remember, the king of Babylon has already surrounded Jerusalem with his armies, and he has the city under siege, and he's trying to destroy it. It hasn't happened yet. It will happen about 6 months later in August of 586 BC, that it will actually be destroyed. So the king of Babylon is getting ready to destroy Jerusalem. Jerusalem has already been put out of business as a trading place. So that's great for Tyre, right? The money's flowing in. Tyre is rich, and now that one of their major competitors is being put out of business, more money is flowing through Tyre, and they are happy, right? That's exactly how you would expect them to behave. Well, God's not real thrilled with that. God is not thrilled when people see the Jews having difficulty and gloat over that and say, this is great for me. That's not what God wants in this world. So that's what's going on. It says the gate to the nations is broken. The gate to the nations would be Jerusalem and its trading area that it worked with. And its doors have swung open to me. In other words, the people of Tyre can now pick up some of that business. It's kind of like when your competitor goes out of business, right? Now all of a sudden you can pick up their business. Now that she lies in ruins, I will prosper. So now that Jerusalem is about to be destroyed and is in the process of being destroyed, Things are going really great in Tyre. Not that they weren't to begin with, but they're going really great in Tyre. So God's not happy with them because of what we just talked about from Genesis 12. If you curse Jerusalem, God will curse you. Simple fact. He said that to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. It's been the way he's handled the world for the last 4,000 years. So let's take a look now at, by the way, as soon as the king of Babylon finished conquering Jerusalem, which would be 6 months after this date, guess where he went next? He went to Tyre. And he started a 13-year siege. And just the year after this, and later on in 586, he started a 13-year siege that went on for 13 years. And in 13 years, he managed to destroy this part of Tyre, the main part of Tyre he managed to destroy. Interestingly enough, he was never able to take the island. Alexander the Great eventually took it 260 years later, but the king of Babylon was never able to actually take the island. So he eventually came up with a peace treaty with the king on the island because the king had just seen his whole mainland thing destroyed. A lot of his trading was gone. So the Babylonians and the Tyre people eventually put together a peace treaty on this thing. But at any rate, that's where he went to next, was to go after Tyre. He says, all this riches, all this money, why not have it, right? So he took his army from Jerusalem, went to Tyre, and besieged that city next. Let's move on now to verse 3 through 6 in your handout. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Tyre. Not good to have God against you, right? I am against you, Tyre, and I will bring many nations against you, like the sea casting up its waves. They will destroy the walls of Tyre and pull down her towers. I will scrape away her rubble and make her a bare rock. Out in the sea she will become a place to spread fish nets. For I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. She will become plunder for the nations, and her settlements on the mainland will be ravaged by the sword. Then they will know that I am the Lord. So what God is doing here is he's giving us prophecies, two prophecies here. One of them is about to happen very shortly, and that is that when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, finishes with Jerusalem here, the next place he's going to go is right there to Tyre. So he's going to besiege them and put them under siege, and he will soon conquer the mainland part of it. The second part of it, though, is a prophecy that wouldn't happen for another 260 years. And that is that eventually Alexander the Great would finally besiege the island itself and would finally conquer it. And Alexander the Great built a ramp all the way, this is almost a mile out in the ocean, built a ramp all the way out there so he could get his siege engines all the way out to the island. And then he proceeded to batter down the 150-foot walls that were holding it. And it took him quite a while to besiege it. But Alexander the Great was a determined guy, and he eventually did besiege that city and did conquer it eventually. So God is talking about two different things in this passage. One that's about to happen in the next few years, which the people will see and know that it's a valid prophecy because they'll see it with their own eyes. And the other one that will happen 260 years later. So as we go through this piece, bear in mind God's mixing in two different time frames here of things that are going to happen to Tyre. It will be partially destroyed, mostly destroyed by the Babylonians now, but ultimately that temple on the island, that temple to that pagan god, will be destroyed 260 years later. And God mixes those together as we go through it. So he says that the walls, he will pull down the walls. There were walls around the mainland city as well, not as high as around the island. And that he will scrape away her rubble and make her a bare rock. Now, rock is an interesting word. The word Tyre in Phoenician, bear in mind this is a Phoenician city, means rock. So Tyre is named after the island itself that's off the coast. So Tyre means rock in Phoenician. And God is saying in this, notice how God says this, right? He says, I will scrape away her rubble and make her a bare rock. So the rock will be bare. And sure enough, when Alexander the Great eventually did take the island, he completely destroyed everything and took it right down to bare rock. He actually scraped away the earth that was on there. He had his people scrape the earth out, the ground out, and leave nothing but a rock out there in the ocean when he got done. That's exactly what happened 260 years later when Alexander the Great got there. So this is a great prophecy, right? It's just incredible for us to look at the prophecy that's in the Bible and realize how God could see something that was going to happen immediately within a few years and something that would happen 260 years later and give us that much detail about what would happen, that they would scrape it down to rock. That's exactly what they did. He says, out in the sea it will become a place to spread fish nets. And apparently the rock was used primarily for fishing after that. It says she will become the plunder for the nations. So basically the Babylonians were going to take most of her wealth, and then Alexander the Great would come along and take the rest of her wealth. And then it says her settlements on the mainland will be ravaged by the sword. So the king of Babylon, during this period, right after the fall of Jerusalem, conquered all of the other trading nations or trading cities that were around her. The Phoenicians had a bunch of trading cities here. One of them up here is Beirut, by the way. But they had a bunch of trading cities around here, and the king of Babylon would destroy all of those over the next several years. So God knew exactly what was going to happen. Great prophecy, right? So let's move on now to verses 7 through 14. For this is what the sovereign Lord says. From the north, that would be Babylon, I am going to bring against Tyre Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, king of kings, with horses and chariots, with horsemen and a great army. He will ravage your settlements on the mainland with sword. He will set up siege works against you, build a ramp up to your walls, and raise his shields against you. He will direct the blows of his battering rams against your walls and demolish your towers with his weapons. His horses will be so many that they will cover you with dust. Your walls will tremble at the noise of the war horses, wagons, and chariots when he enters your gates, as men enter a city whose walls have been broken through. The hooves of the horses will trample all your streets. He will kill your people with the sword, and your strong pillars will fall to the ground. They will plunder your wealth and loot your merchandise. They will break down your walls and demolish your fine houses and throw your stones, timber, and rubble into the sea. I will put an end to your noisy songs, and the music of your harps will be heard no more. I will make you a bare rock, and you will become a place to spread fish nets. You will never be rebuilt, for I, the Lord, have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. So bear in mind, what was the error of their ways here, besides the fact that they were pagans and had all the pagan stuff going on, which everybody else did in the world at that time. It was that they were jealous of Israel because Israel was their trading partner. And when Israel was being destroyed here, 6 months after this date it fell, when Israel was being destroyed, they looked at it and said, wow, we get more business. It's going to be great for us. That's why Tyre gets destroyed, right? Because they looked at what was happening to Israel and saw it as being beneficial to them. Great lessons for us, right? As Gentiles, we need to understand that our job is to make sure that we are blessing Israel. So it's clear in a whole lot of places in the Bible. Sometimes we get confused on that, but it's clear in the Bible. So as we go through this, the king of Babylon is coming down from the north. He's coming down from Babylon. He's taking Jerusalem. He's just about to finish that, and then he's going over here to Tyre, and he's going to destroy all these other cities on the coast. And it gives a whole lot of detail in here, which is exactly what really happened when the siege of Tyre went on. By the way, the siege of Tyre took 13 years for Nebuchadnezzar to finally break through the mainland part of Tyre. It took 13 years. Tyre, we'll talk about the kind of army that Tyre had. And on the one hand, it was a great army. On the other hand, it was a poor army. It was made up of the best mercenaries in the world, the best fighters. They knew how to fight. But they weren't ultimately loyal to Tyre. That was the fundamental problem they had. Mercenaries have a lot to be said for them. They're people that really know how to fight. But at the end of the day, they're not people whose homes and families depend upon them being successful. So that was what finally did Tyre in, was the armies that they had. It says he's going to ravage the settlements on the mainland. He's going to put them to the sword. He's going to put siege works up. All of that is exactly what happened. He built ramps up to the walls and raised his shields against you. Now there's a part where he puts in what happened in Alexander's time. Bear in mind, he's putting both of those together in here. In Alexander's time, when Alexander built a ramp all the way out to the island, what he did was his soldiers held their shields over their heads so that as they were throwing rocks and swords and arrows and all that down from the walls, they wouldn't get hurt. So his soldiers held their shields up over their heads, and the people worked underneath to build this ramp out to the island. That's how they did it. And here's God forecasting that. And this would happen 260 years later, right? Amazing how God does prophecy. And then it goes on to say, he will direct the blows of the battering rams against your walls. He will demolish your towers. That's also mixing both of them in together. There were towers on the walls in the mainland, but the other towers, there were 5 towers on this island that were supposedly among the most beautiful in the world, that were the pride of Tyre. And they were built to the god of Tyre. I don't remember his name now, but the god of Tyre. And when Alexander the Great finally took the city, took the island, the first thing he did was tear those five towers down. So that's exactly what he's talking about here. It says his horses will be so many that they will cover you with dust. Your walls will tremble with the noise of the war horses, wagons, and chariots. When he enters your gates, as men enter a city who have been broken through. That's describing the point where the city is finally broken into. And as I said, it took 13 years for Nebuchadnezzar to actually break through the walls and take the city of Tyre. And it says all of her wealth is going to be plundered, everything's going to be, all of her songs are going to be ended. And then it goes on to say it will never be rebuilt. Now, the city of Tyre was rebuilt, but never to the same glory, the same level that it was at that time. Tyre was the envy of the world up until Nebuchadnezzar destroyed it. So it was rebuilt eventually. It is still there today. But what God is talking about here when he says it will never be rebuilt, he means to the same level of glory that it was back at that time. It was the greatest city in the world at that time. Questions on that? Let's move on to verse 15 now, and we're going to do 15 through 18. This is what the sovereign Lord says to Tyre. Will not the coastlands tremble at the sound of your fall, when the wounded groan and the slaughter takes place in you? Then all the princes of the coast will step down from their thrones and lay aside their robes and take off their embroidered garments. Clothed with terror, they will sit on the ground, trembling every moment, appalled at you. And they will take up a lament concerning you and say to you, How you are destroyed, city of renown, peopled by men of the sea. You were a power of the seas, you and your citizens, you put your terror on all who live there. Now the coastlands tremble on the day of your fall. The islands in the sea are terrified at your collapse. In other words, the whole world's about to change, right? This was the most trading-centric power in the world at that time, and it's about to be destroyed. And all of the rest of the trading network of the world is all going to change now. And all these people around other places in the world are going to say, am I next? Is this king of Babylon going to come after me next? Yeah, and he did. He went after everybody he could find in that part of the world. Over the next several years, he just made war on everybody and conquered a whole lot of places. So the whole trading network of the world is being destroyed here, and people are saying, whoa, where am I going to get my goods from, first of all? And secondly, more importantly, am I next? Is he coming here next? So that's what people are worried about when this is all going on. So God is talking here about how everybody else in the world is watching the fall of the greatest city in the world with what everybody thought was the best army in the world. It's all going to fall. And then they're all going to say, gosh, Jerusalem fell. Now these guys fell. What's next? What's going to happen next? So that's what God's talking about there. Just see if there's anything I left out of that. Yeah, I said in my notes, the rest of the world understood that if powerful Tyre could be defeated by the Babylonians, then no one was safe. They were all in fear of what would happen to them, and that's pretty much where the world was at that point. Questions on that? Let's move on to 19 through 21 next. This is the end of this particular chapter. This is what the sovereign Lord says. When I make you a desolate city, the cities no longer inhabited, and when I bring the ocean depths over you and its vast waters cover you, then I will bring you down with those who go down to the pit, to the people of long ago. I will make you dwell in the earth below, as in ancient ruins. And those who go down to the pit, you will not return or take your place in the land of the living. I will bring you to a horrible end, and you will be no more. You will be sought, but you will never again be found, declares the sovereign Lord. Now, what's he talking about here? Is he talking about something physical here? He's talking about what's going to happen to them spiritually, right? This is a spiritual thing that he's talking about here. Let's go through this very carefully. These are very sinful people, right? These are people who are pagans. They worship false gods. They gloated over the fall of Jerusalem. These are people that God is about to destroy. And by the way, all of us Gentiles should take some heed over this, right? You know, God will destroy us as well. The Jews are not the only ones that can get destroyed by their sins. God will destroy us as well if we decide to make a decision to be in sin. But now he's talking about us as individuals rather than as a nation. Now he's talking about each one of us as an individual. He's saying, I will bring the ocean depths over you and its vast waters cover you. Well, that's not actually what happened to Tyre. What God is talking about here, the ocean in the Bible and the depths of the ocean is frequently talking about sin and despair and all of that. When you're underneath the ocean, you have no way out, right? You can't breathe, everything is, you're going to drown, everything's not good. So that's what God's talking about here. He says, then I will bring you down and with those who go down to the pit. So what's he talking about? When the people die, that's not the end for them, is it? When the people die, they're going to go someplace, and they're going to go to the pit. And the pit is a place, in the Bible, you'll see something called Sheol. Sheol is a place where people go. It's a temporary place where people go when they die in the Old Testament. We'll see that term a lot in the Old Testament. Now, there's two kinds of people who die. You have some that go to what's called the bosom of Abraham. You think those are the good people or the bad people? Those are the good people, right? Those are the people who have sought God and who have connected to God and who have, brought him into their lives and made connection with God. And then you have the people who go to a place called Hades, which is another name in the Bible that you'll see. For hell. Yeah, in our term, today we don't use the word Hades, we use the word hell. They are essentially synonymous. When people talk about hell, they're talking about what the Bible calls Hades. So people who are awaiting final punishment are in a place called Hades. Now, they're going to be there for a long time. Most of the bosom of Abraham people, some of them were actually raised at the time of Christ's resurrection. Most of them will be raised during the 7-year period during the tribulation, shortly after the rapture. Most of these people will be raised during there's a point in the book of Revelation where it talks about how these people will then be brought forth. So these people will be brought forth into their permanent glory at that point. But these people will go on until the end of the 7-year tribulation period. In fact, to the end of the 1,000-year reign, they go on in Hades. And then they go to a place called, which is their permanent home, called the Lake of Fire. So if you see those terms in the Bible, you know what those are, what they mean. So when God says that when the Phoenicians die, when the people of Tyre die, they're going to the pit, he's talking about right here. They're going into this temporary storage place in Sheol that's called Hades, that they'll be in until the end of the 1,000-year reign. At the end of the 1,000-year reign, then they will be judged in the great white throne judgment, and at that point they will go into the lake of fire forever. So that's what God is talking about here. So he's all of a sudden changing from, I'm going to destroy you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to take away everything you own, I'm going to blow up your cities and everything else, to, I'm also going to take away your soul, right? That's what God is talking about here. He is switching in this passage that we're reading to talking about what he's going to do to them spiritually. The real them, the real human being that's underneath this body is a soul, is a spirit that's underneath us. And God is talking about what he's really going to do with those people at that point. Pretty involved concept. Anybody got any questions on that? Okay. Yeah, he says, I will make you dwell in the earth below. So he's talking about Hades. By the way, the Bible consistently describes Hades as being someplace inside the earth. That's why we always think of Hades as being hot, or hell as being hot. And we always say down there as opposed to up there. That's because the Bible talks about Hades as being someplace in the earth. And we know scientifically that the interior of the earth is quite a bit warmer than it is here at the surface. It's a lot hotter than it is here at the surface. So the center of the earth actually has some molten part of it, actually, which is like iron and stuff that's molten down there. He says, I will bring you to a horrible end and you will be no more. That's talking about the ultimate going to the lake of fire. God, the end for these people will ultimately be horrible. So that's what God is saying is going to happen to Gentiles who do not accept him. So as Gentiles, we need to make the decision to accept God, to accept and make a connection to God. Cool, that's an important lesson here. All right, let me move on now to chapter 27. In chapter 27, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, take up a lament concerning Tyre. Say to Tyre, situated at the gateway of the sea, merchants of people on many coasts, this is what the sovereign Lord says. So this is a poem now that we're about to read. In Hebrew, it would read as a poem. I don't read Hebrew well, so we're just going to read it in English. You say, Tyre, I am perfect in beauty. Your domain was on the high seas. Your builders thought your beauty your builders brought your beauty to perfection. So let me stop there for a minute. So God is saying, the Lord is saying here that Tyre was viewed all around the world as the most beautiful city in the world because it was so rich. They could afford everything. We're actually going to see some details here of what they could afford. That these people were incredibly rich. It should remind us a little of our world today, right? Our world today is incredibly rich. And there are parts of our world that are just beyond imagining rich today. Well, Tyre was like that for their world at that time, kind of like parts of our world are today, for us today. Incredibly rich. So let's move on now to verses 5 through 9. And 5 through 9, the poem that we're looking at here describes Tyre as being a beautiful ship. And let me tell you some things about the ships that Tyre made. They were the greatest ships in the world. It wasn't until relatively recent times, probably the last couple of 100 years, that people have made better ships than what the Tyre people made back in those days. Those ships could go all over. They could even go out into the deep ocean, even out into the Atlantic. Those ships had a crew of 200 people on them. They had oars, they had sails, they had, the best technology of that day. The best woods were brought in from a whole bunch of places to make them. The best caulking materials were created to be able to caulk the seams. They had the best maintenance people on board to be able to take care of the ship as it was sailing and it ran into problems. They had the best seamen, they had the best oarsmen, the strongest oarsmen. They had the best scouts and lookouts. They went all around the world to find the best people for every job on those ships. That was how serious these people were about their seamanship and their nautical thing. So God will compare them to a ship. Let's look at this as we go through now, verses 5 through 9. God is comparing Tyre to a ship. They made all your timbers of juniper from Senir. Now, Senir is a place in Lebanon that had the cedars of Lebanon, perfect timbers. Those were the timbers that were used. They took a cedar from Lebanon and made a mast for you. So some of the cedars of Lebanon were just gigantic, and they were just massive, things, and they were nice and straight. They would cut them down and make them into the masts for these ships. Of oaks from Bashan they made your oars. Well, Bashan was a place in Cyprus where they had the best oak trees in the world, the strongest oak trees in the world. And that was the strongest material to make oars out of. Of cypress wood from the coasts of Cyprus, that's interesting, of cypress woods, which is a different thing, from the coasts of Cyprus, which is an island, they made your deck adorned with ivory. So they took cypress wood, the best cypress wood in the world, and turned it into the decks of the ships. And they adorned it with ivory. So ivory comes from elephants, right? This is tough stuff to find. Where do you find ivory in Lebanon, right? Yeah, so they've got to get it from somewhere. So that's how rich they were, that they were able to go get ivory from Africa and put ivory adornments on their decks, on the floor of their boats. That's how rich these people were at that time. Fine embroidered linen from Egypt was your sail. Egypt still makes some of the best cotton in the world. You see ads on TV today for Egyptian cotton, that the weave on Egyptian cotton is tighter than it is on almost any other sheet that you can find anywhere in the world. So bed sheets made out of Egyptian cotton sell at a premium today. You can see them around today. Fine embroidered linen from Egypt was your sail and served as your banner. Your awnings were of blue and purple from the coasts of Elisha. Blue and purple were the royal colors in those days, so that says that's because those dyes were the hardest dyes to make. So these are the best, right? This is the best stuff. That's the whole idea of Tyre. Tyre was about the best. Think of some of the billionaires that make their mansions out of the best, right? They bring in the finest marble from here and the finest gold fixtures from there and all of that. This is what Tyre was doing with their ships. From the coast of Elisha. Let's see, where's Elisha? Elisha is a town in Cyprus, by the way. So apparently that was where you got the best fabrics from in those days. Now we're going to talk about the crew. Men of Sidon and Arvad were their oarsmen. Sidon was another city up the coast, and Arvad was further up the coast. And apparently they grew great big strong guys that were good with the oars, with the pulling of the oars. So apparently the best oarsmen in the world came from there, from those places. Your skilled men, Tyre, were aboard as your sailors. So the sailors, the people who actually ran the ship, the brains of the people, the ones who said, take that sail up and put that one down, and we'll go faster around here, and we're going to turn the rudder to the right there. Those people were from Tyre. Those were the best seamen in the world. So that's what he's talking about here. Veteran craftsmen of Byblos were on board as shipwrights to caulk your seams. So he had all these maintenance guys on board, right, that he brought from Byblos. And Byblos was a place in Lebanon. In fact, Byblos is still in Lebanon. It's a city in Lebanon today. But so they had people on board the ship to maintain it, to put extra caulking in the seams, so they didn't have to take the ship ashore and dry dock it to get more caulk in. They could just do it at sea while they were at sea. And they had people to maintain these ships that were on the ships, and the best of everything for these ships. All the ships of the sea and their sailors came alongside to trade for your wares. So God is saying, you guys are seafaring people, and you're the best. You're the best at what you do. You are the best seafaring people in the world. And he's comparing them to a ship, to a Tyrian ship. So that's how he's doing this poetry here. This is in a form of a poem, by the way, as I said. So if you could speak Hebrew, you could actually recite this as poetry. Questions on that? Okay, let's move on now to verses 10 and 11. Men of Persia, Lydia, and Put served as soldiers in your army. They hung their shields and helmets on your walls, bringing your splendor. Men of Arvad and Helek guarded your walls on every side. Men of Gamad were in your towers. They hung their shields around your walls. They brought your beauty to perfection. This was, in one respect, this was the greatest strength of Tyre, and it was also its greatest weakness. Tyre was so rich that they didn't bother having their own people defend the city. They hired the best mercenaries in the world, so they paid them to defend the city. There's some good to that, right? The good part is you have the best. You have the best people on the walls, people who know how to handle defending a wall, who know how to handle shooting down a siege when it comes in. You have people who know how to guard in the towers, that don't fall asleep, that know exactly what to look for and where to look. You have the best of the best soldiers defending you. And these are people that are being paid to put their lives on the line. So they will give up their lives for money. And they're the best soldiers in the world. That's the good news. The bad news is they don't have that stake in the city that the real people who live there have, right? If they fail, if they make a mistake, they lose their lives, but their family doesn't die. It's not their family that's going to die. It's the people in the city. So the problem with mercenary soldiers throughout history has been the same thing. They're great soldiers. They do a great job. They're usually much better than the people they're up against as individuals, but they don't have the same motivation that a citizen soldier has, right? A citizen soldier's out there fighting for his country, just like the people in Ukraine, right? How on earth are these people doing what they're doing? The people of Ukraine are out there fighting for their country. They're out fighting against evil, they're fighting for their country, and they're putting up an incredible fight against an incredible opponent. You can't do that with mercenaries. You need people who have a citizen spirit as soldiers. And that was Tyre's greatest weakness, and ultimately that was what did them in with when Alexander the Great came. Eventually he was able to overcome the skill set of the professional soldiers, the mercenaries that were there. So God is explaining that to us here so we understand it. Questions on that? Let's move on now to verses 12 through 24. And now we're going to talk about the people themselves, not the soldiers anymore. We're going to talk about the people of Tyre. We're going to talk about the people who actually live there, and also the people that trade with them, and the people that buy things from them. Tarshish did business with you. By the way, Tarshish is in Spain. Tarshish did business with you because of your great wealth of goods. They exchanged silver, iron, tin, and lead for your merchandise. So there's trading going on here. Greece, Tubal, and Meshech did business with you. They traded human beings, slavery, right? Human trafficking, and articles of bronze for your wares. Men of Beth Togarmah exchanged chariot horses, cavalry horses, and mules for your merchandise. The men of Rhodes traded with you, and many coastlands were your customers. They paid you with ivory tusks and ebony. Aram did business with you because of your many products. They exchanged turquoise, purple fabric, embroidered work, fine linen, coral, and rubies for your merchandise. Judah and Israel traded with you. They exchanged wheat for minneth and confections, honey, olive oil, and balm for your wares. Damascus did business with you because of your many products and great wealth of goods. They offered wine from Helbon, wool from Zahar, and casks of wine from Izal in exchange for your wares, wrought iron, cassia, and calamus. Dedan traded in saddle blankets with you. Arabia and all the princes of Kedar were your customers. They did business with you in lambs, rams, and goats. The merchants of Sheba and Ramah traded with you. For your merchandise, they exchanged the finest of all kinds of spices and precious stones and gems. Haran, Kenna, and Eden, and merchants of Sheba, Asher, and Kilmad traded with you. In your marketplace, they traded with you beautiful garments, blue fabric, embroidered work, and multicolored rugs with cords twisted and tightly knotted. So we're going to see here all the different countries. Now, as you go through that list, bear something in mind. Ezekiel's saying this to these people in Babylon, right?
Yes.
500 miles away from Tyre. He was a Jewish priest at Jerusalem at one point. He's never been to Tyre. He has no idea what Tyre's like. And yet he has this level of detail of what's going on in Tyre. Where does he get that from? Guess who gives it to him, right? When God, this is a real prophecy. God is really giving him this prophecy. God is telling him stuff about Tyre that is so detailed and so correct that, and yet he's never been there. He's never seen it. Where is he getting it from? He's got to be getting it from God in his prophecy. Kind of good to tell us that prophecy really is true, right? So, they received silver and metals from Tarshish. That's in Spain. That's at the other end of the Mediterranean Sea, over someplace over there, right? They received slaves from Javan in Greece. So they were doing human trafficking through there. Guess what? That's happening today, right? It's happening more in our country today than it ever has before. In the last 3 years or so, we've seen more human trafficking at the border. They say that today you can't cross into the United States over the border unless you pay the cartel. If you try to get in without paying the cartel, you are in trouble. You will get beaten. So today, basically, human trafficking controls our border of the people coming across it. That's the first time we've ever had this much human trafficking in history in our country. He says, from Tubal and Meshech. Tubal and Meshech might sound familiar to you. We're going to study them later on in a chapter here. Tubal and Meshech is Gog. The famous country of Gog is Tubal and Meshech. That's the land of Gog, and the king of Gog later on was Magog. That's a place in Turkey in Revelation. We're going to study that as we get deeper on into this, but it's mentioned in Revelation. She received the finest horses and mules, including war horses, from Beth Togarmah, which is in Armenia. Armenia's way up in there someplace. It's a long ways away from where we are here. She received ivory and ebony from the Isle of Rhodes. Rhodes is an island in the Mediterranean Sea. She did much business with Aram, which is in Syria, including turquoise, purple fabric, embroidered work, fine linen, coral, and rubies. She received iron and spices from Javan, that's in Greece, and Verdun and Vidon in Greece, and from Uzal in Yemen. Yemen is way down around the floor down here. That's where the Houthis are today. Those of you that follow the news, they're from this part. She received wheat and corn from Judah and Israel, in addition to honey, olive oil, and balm. We know where Israel is. She received many things from Damascus in Syria, including wine from Helbon, which is a city in Syria, fine wool from Zahar, and wine from Izal. Izal is actually in Turkey. She sold these nations wrought iron, cassia, which is perfume, and calamus, which is sugar cane. So somebody's had to be supplying all of that to them, because they didn't do any of this stuff themselves. They just traded. Saddle blankets and leather came from Didon in Greece. The Greeks were known for making the finest leather products in the world at that time. From Kedar in Arabia, she received livestock, lambs, rams, goats. She got gold and precious stones from Sheba. Remember the Queen of Sheba? That was from Yemen. Yemen, again, is where the Houthis are today, down in the Red Sea. And from Rabbah in Ammon, that's modern-day Jordan. And then it included a whole list of other nations that we don't have time to get into today. We're going to run out of time. But she got beautiful garments from them, blue fabric, embroidered work, multicolored rugs, cords twisted, tightly knotted up, all that stuff. So we understand here just what kind of trading nation Tyre was, that they were a nation that traded everything with everyone, and they were rich because of it. And they were truly blessed by the Lord, right? I mean, they were so rich. They had everything. Just look at all this stuff. They were living in beautiful, beautiful homes by the sea with these fantastic ships to trade in. I mean, they were so blessed by God. So we should assume that every day they thanked God for that, right? Does that sound like what we do when we get blessed and get rich? Take a look at the rich people in the world today. Do they spend every day thanking God for their richness?
No, they're greedy.
They typically want more, don't they? And they typically think they did it themselves. They typically think they got rich because they were good, not because God blessed them. There's a lesson in there for us, right? There's a lesson in there for us. We don't get good stuff in life because we are worthy of it. We get good stuff in life because God blesses us with it. And these people were not thanking God. They weren't even worshiping God. They were idolaters. They were actually worshiping idols. They were thanking idols for this stuff that God was giving them. So you get a sense of how God is pretty unhappy with that. And that brings me to mind of the last of the 7 churches in chapter 3 of Revelation. And this is the church of Laodicea. And the church of Laodicea is the 7th church in the progression of churches. It's pretty much where we are today. It's a church that's very rich, where the people say, we don't need God. We can take care of everything ourselves. We have so much money, we can protect ourselves. We can use our money to hire people to protect us. We don't need to worry. We can buy food. We can import food from anywhere. As we look at the lesson of Tyre going down to defeat, and the people ultimately ending up here, we need to be aware that we might be in a similar situation. We might be in the church of Laodicea in our time. We might be in a church in a pre-tribulation kind of situation where we think we are really doing great, and it's all about us, right?
Taking God out of everything.
Right. One of the things I remember and we all remember COVID 4 years ago. There was a point during COVID when every night the president would have a press conference. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And the next day, the governor of a state, I won't mention the state, some of you probably know, but the governor of the state would get on and give he was from the opposition party, would give his version of it, of what was going on. And one time I was watching his press conference the next day, and he got so arrogant during the press conference. And he said, somebody asked him a question, is God blessing you and helping you through this? And he said, absolutely not. God has nothing to do with this. This is us. This is me and my administration. We are making this work. We are defeating this bug, this germ. Interestingly enough, a few months later, he got blown out of office in a what do you call it? A scandal, but it was a scandal of harassment, sexual harassment. I thought that was interesting because I watched that press conference and I thought, God's going to get him for that. And sure enough, a few months later, he got blown out of office in a sexual harassment scandal. So, God has his way of taking care of things.
Especially when you try to do it without him.
Right. God wants us to understand that he's the reason we are blessed. We are not blessed because we are great people that are wonderful and can do everything. That's not the reason we get blessed in this world. So, there's a lot of lessons here for us. We need to give God the praise and glory for what he's doing for us in our lives. And I'm getting the hook in the back, but let me finish my point here. We need to give God the praise and glory for what we're doing for what he's doing in our lives, rather than thinking that it's us. It's so easy when you get rich and you get successful to say, I don't need God. It's all about me. We are the church of Laodicea when we do that, the church that is right before the rapture. That's not where we should be. So anyway, that's a key lesson out of watching the fall of Tyre. Now next week we actually are going to continue in Tyre. Tyre goes on for another chapter and a half. There's some more stuff we're going to study. And then we're going to get into the city of Sidon, which is the 6th one. And Sidon was another city, a seafaring city just up the coast from there. And then, I'm sorry, not next week. Next week Stephen's here, week after that. And then after that we'll get into Egypt. So any other questions before we break here? Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone at home. We pray your week is blessed, and we pray the Lord is with you. Thank you.